The Superclasico returns with the Classica San Sebastian, the classic post-Tour one-day race. And of course, we've got some great riders coming off of the Tour like Tadej Pogacar, but we've also got some other riders like Remco Evenepoel who didn't do the Tour and are coming in fairly fresh into this race. And that's really the dilemma of this race, is that it's the battle of who actually has the legs at this time of year. It's pretty hard to gauge, but I'm hoping that in this video I can provide a bit of advice as to who you should be selecting for your team. Of course, Pogacar is the most expensive rider at 32. This makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I think that I'll be selecting him. I think that I'd strongly recommend you do select him. He's just a rider who, no matter what race he does, he's always incredibly competitive. We've seen that in so many one-day races this year, like Strade Bianchi and also in Ronde van Vlaanderen. You can never write off Tadej Pogacar, and I definitely think that since I missed out on him in the Tour de France team, I will definitely think that I'll be selecting him this time round. Remco Evenepoel, of course, has won this race back in 2019. That was a year where he also didn't go to the Tour, and he came in very fresh and then won it fairly surprising fashion. I think he cost 8 points back then, but now he costs 28. It's still quite expensive. He has won Liège this year, so he knows how to do a one-day race now. And he is definitely going to be the leader alongside Mikel Frolic-Honore, I believe, for the Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl team. I think Remco is a good pick. I think he's fairly safe and should be putting in a very good performance this year. You got Mike Woods, who I think tested positive just before the final stage of the Tour de France, so I'm a bit apprehensive about picking him. I'm not sure what kind of after effects he's feeling from that COVID positive test. David Gaudu, another one who's coming off of the Tour de France. Of course, he finished 4th place in that race, and although that's a very good result, he did look a little bit not at the sharpest of form at the end of the race. He definitely looked like he was tiring out. I think that his teammate Valentin Madouas, who's 16 credits, actually looked a bit better than him. But Gaudu could certainly launch a bit of a surprise. He is actually somewhat fast in a reduced sprint, and I think that it's very possible he could finish inside the top 10. Michael Matthews, his stage win in the Tour de France was very reminiscent to the climb of some of the climbs that are going to be happening in this race, so I certainly won't be writing him off. Bike Exchange also have some very aggressive options in terms of Simon Yates and Nick Schultz as well, so Matthews might be their sprint option sitting in behind. Schachmann, I think, is a good choice for this race. He looked a bit uneventful in the Tour. I didn't really see him too many times, but I think that it's very possible that, considering that he did a 9th place in the final TT, he's clearly came out of the race with some decent legs, so I think that Schachmann could be a very good choice. Valverde, I believe, is coming back from injury, so I probably wouldn't be selecting him. Arambarou, again, I just haven't seen enough of him. He did look okay in the recent Tour of Wallonia, I think, so perhaps Arambarou could be a decent one. Tiege Benoot, I think, will be leading Jumbo-Visma, but again, I don't know how Tiege would win this race. I don't think that his climbing looked good enough in the Tour, and he's also kind of lacks that kind of snap to really kind of attack away on the final climb. Kuznetsov, again, just hasn't looked great this year. Mohoric, I know he finished very highly in this race last year, finished in 2nd place, but you have to remember that was after a very good Tour where he won 2 stages, and honestly I didn't really see him once during the whole of the Tour except for maybe 1 or 2 breakaways. He just doesn't quite look like the Mohoric of last year. Mollema did a very good TT towards the end of the Tour, and it's usually a race that he does quite well in. Bauke Mollema, he seems to enjoy the Classica San Sebastian, so I think he's a pretty good choice as well. Almeida and Costa I expect to be working for Pogacar or maybe even Ayuso. I think they'd be better options than both of these riders. Dumoulin, he's retiring at the end of the year. I just don't really think that he's going to be a very aggressive and kind of prominent rider in this race, just in my opinion. Masnada showed some pretty good one-day racing legs at the end of last year with Il Lombardia. Perhaps he can do something like that this year. I'm not entirely sure. Nibali, I just haven't seen much of recently, so I'm not sure what his form's like. Van Baarle will be a domestique, so I'd avoid him. Simon Yates has just won the a Spanish kind of 2-day race, and I think that he's obviously looking in very good form. Bike Exchange are looking for some UCI points. I think that Yates is going to be a very good choice for this race, in my opinion, and could be a little bit under the radar if people aren't keeping their fingers on the pulse on PCS, for example. Bettiol looked pretty good in the Tour and could certainly be one of the main riders for EF Education Easy Post if he's climbing well. It is quite a hard day in the saddle, is San Sebastian, so Bettiol could be a little bit risky in my opinion. I think there are some safer options, including possibly, I think Valentin Madouas could be a very good rider for you to pick, considering that he looks so strong at the end of the Tour. It's a race that really suits him. I think that Madouas could be a very good choice. You've also got perhaps Jonas Agir. He could be a decent one. Lutsenko, he finished in 9th place at the Tour, so again, a rider who's shown some pretty decent legs. Conrad and Kelderman. I don't really know who Bora are working for, so either one of them could really be good choices. You've got Danny Martinez and Geraint Thomas, who both finished the Tour in good form. It depends who they're going to be working for. They also have Carlos Rodriguez, the recent Spanish champion. He could be another option as well, but I think both of these are good choices. I just don't know who they're going to be working for. Chavez, although a very good rider and showed some very good form in the Dauphiné, of course he wasn't selected for the Tour. He kind of lacks the skill set to really win this race unless he gets away solo, which I don't think is going to be entirely likely when you consider that there's like Remco Evenepoel and Tadej Pogacar in this race. 14-point riders, there aren't too many which I really like the look of. Maybe like Lorenzo Rota could be a decent one for Intermarché. 12-point riders, Guerrero, I know he crashed out early in the Tour. I did have him on my Tour team, but possibly this could be a race that he could do very well in. After all, he left the Tour early, so he is going to have that freshness going into this race. He has a decent kick where he could win a little kind of reduced sprint between the group. You've also got last year's winner, Neilson Powless. You have to remember that Powless won this race last year after looking not particularly eventful in the Tour. Like, he didn't really do too much in the Tour last year, and then he went and just like won San Sebastian. So riders can really come out of nowhere and like surprise and win this race. Luis Leon Sanchez has a very strong Tour de France. I think he finished quite high up, like top 15 in GC. So I think that he could be a very good choice for Bahrain Victorious. Juan Ayuso at 10 points is very, very tempting considering how just good he's looked this year. He's such a revelational talent. I think that it's very possible that he could be a co-leader alongside Pogacar in this race, and for 10 points that's quite cheap for a rider. Jai Hindley, the winner of the Giro, I think that for 10, obviously that's a pretty good value pick as well, but I would possibly prefer a user. I just don't think that Jai Hindley has the one-day credentials really. Gino Maida, Bahrain's press release said that they were hoping that he'd be in the finale, and really the word hoping that he's going to be there doesn't really fill me with a lot of confidence. You've also got Nick Schultz. I think is a great choice. He finished the Tour in very strong fashion. He finished, I think he was like 16th in that final TT, and for a rider who isn't very well renowned for a TT, he did really well there. So I think he left the Tour with some very good legs, and I think that he could do very well here, especially considering that he's come from a Spanish team in the past, so he's obviously used to this style of racing. The 8-point riders, I'm really not a fan of any of them, other than maybe Maxime van der Heels, who did very well in this race last year. I think he came like top 20. You got a few 6-point riders who I like the look of. Santiago Boitrago, of course, won a stage of the Giro, so he's a very good climber. Could certainly provide a bit of a surprise, maybe finish inside the top 20 in this race. We've also got Hugo Hull, who won a stage of a Tour after breaking away on that really steep climb, and I think that this is a race that could suit him, especially since Israel don't really have an out-and-out leader for this race. I think that Hugo Hull could have a bit of freedom to do his own race and could certainly finish inside the top 15 in my opinion. Carlos Rodriguez for the Ineos Grenadiers is probably one of my strongest recommendations for a 6-point rider. He's the new Spanish champion. He's going to be doing the Vuelta a España. I think that this is going to be a race where he could do really well, especially since the Ineos Grenadiers don't really have an out-and-out leader, similar to Israel Premier Tech. I think that he could have a bit more freedom in this race. Matthias Skimmels Jensen has also looked in pretty good form recently at the Tour of Wallonie. Carlos Verona, again, looks very good at the Tour in certain stages, so he could be another one to go with. In terms of 4-point riders, there are kind of one or two. Guys Leemblazer could be a decent one, considering that Jumbo, again, kind of their leading rider is Tiege Benoot. Guys van Leemblazer had a very good Giro, very strong climbing performances. I think that he could be a good one for 4 points. Very low risk as well. Luke Plapp, a decent climber, might be a domestique, but could certainly pick up some assist points. And speaking of assist points, probably go with Joel Suter. He could pick up assist points for Pogacar if he wins, for example. So that's all the riders. That is pretty much just the whole guide to the whole thing. This is my team at the moment. It's currently got 3 main guys with like Pogacar, Yates and Evenepoel. An alternative would be perhaps that I'd swap around Evenepoel for, say, Schachmann or Gaudu, and then I'd use those 6 points on, say, Hugo Hull, and I'd upgrade him to a 12-point rider, say Ruben Guerrero, for example. So those are kind of the 2 team scenarios that I'm between at the moment. Let me know in the comments down below who you're thinking of selecting. Did I miss anybody out in any of those riders who I was going through? All that is left to say is to keep safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!